Welcome to the Light and Shadow podcast. I am Gray, quantum-informed spiritual mentor, founder of the Ethereus Academy, and creator of the Alchemical Pattern to Healing framework. I work at the threshold where insight alone stops working and real transformation begins. This is the space for the spiritually aware who are ready to go deeper than healing has taken them. Every civilization that has ever tried to understand the nature of reality has arrived at the same problem. 4 elements are not enough: earth, water, fire, air. The classical elements that every ancient philosophical system, Greek, Vedic, Chinese, Egyptian, identified as the building blocks of the physical world. They are real, they are foundational, they describe with remarkable precision the 4 states of matter that modern science would later confirm: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. But every tradition that sat with these 4 long enough eventually reached the same conclusion. Something is missing, something that cannot be seen, cannot be measured in the conventional sense, cannot be reduced to any combination of the 4, and yet is somehow the principle that makes the 4 possible, the substance behind the substances, the intelligence organizing the elements into the coherent reality we experience. The Greeks called it Aether. The Alchemists called it Quintessence, the 5th essence. The Vedic tradition called it Akasha. The Hermeticists called it the universal solvent, the prima materia, the philosopher's stone in its purest form. Modern physics calls what fills the quantum vacuum the zero-point field, an infinite sea of potential energy from which all physical reality emerges and into which it returns. Different names, the same recognition. There is a 5th element, and it is not a physical substance. It is the principle that makes physical substance possible, and encoded in 2 of the most ancient and most misunderstood symbols in the Esoteric tradition: the Pentagram and the Seal of Solomon. Is a complete map of how all 5 principles relate to each other, how the 4 elements arise from and return to the 5th, how the entire architecture of reality, from the densest matter to the highest consciousness, is structured across 2 distinct but complementary geometric keys. Today we are going into all of it: the history and meaning of quintessence across philosophical and alchemical traditions, the extraordinary bridge between plasma and the ancient concept of ether, the 5th element as pure consciousness, and what that means for magic, for will, and for your capacity as a conscious creator of reality. The pentagram decoded as the 5-element map with spirit at its crown, and the Seal of Solomon decoded as the complementary cosmological diagram of how spirit and matter interpenetrate in perfect union. 2 symbols, 1 complete picture, and you are built from all 5 elements. Before we can understand the 5th element, we need to understand why the 4 were never sufficient, and what they were actually describing. The 4-element framework appears in ancient Greece, most formally through Empedocles in the 5th century BCE, later systematized by Aristotle into the philosophical structure that would dominate Western thought for nearly 2,000 years. But before Greece, in Vedic India, in Babylonia, in Egypt, the same 4-fold structure was already being used to map the nature of physical reality. This convergence is not coincidental. It is the same recognition arriving independently through different channels of a human inquiry into the same underlying truth. The earth, which is the solid state, the principle of density, of form, of stability and resistance, the element that provides structure, that holds shape, that anchors the other elements into locatable, tangible existence. In the human body, the bones, the flesh, the physical structure that makes embodiment possible. The water, the liquid state, the principle of flow, of adaptability, of emotional responsiveness and depth. The element that takes the shape of its container, that dissolves and carries, that connects and nourishes. In the human body, it's the blood, the lymph, the tears, the air, the gaseous state, the principle of thought, of connection, of the invisible medium through which communication travels, the element of the mind, subtle, the medium through which fire spreads and through which life breathes. In the human body, it's the breath, the nervous system's electrical communication, the space within and between cells. Fire, the plasma state. And here is where something remarkable begins to emerge. Modern physics identifies 4 states of matter: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. Plasma is ionized gas, matter in its most energetically excited state, where electrons have been stripped from atoms, creating a field of charged particles that behaved as a unified whole rather than as individual component. Plasma is the most abundant state of visible matter in the universe. Stars are plasma. Lightning is plasma. The solar wind is plasma. The ancient element of fire, the most transformative, the most energetic, the most uncontainable of the 4 classical elements, corresponds precisely to the plasma state. The ancient world identified the same 4 fundamental states of matter that modern physics would later confirm through scientific measurement. Now, why 4 is never enough? Each element requires the others to exist. Earth without water is dust. Water without air cannot flow. Fire without air cannot sustain. Air without earth has nothing to move through. The 4 are interdependent. Now, the hidden architecture of reality is quintessence, plasma, the pentagram, the seal of Solomon, and the magic of the 5th element. The dynamic system requires something that organizes it, something that holds the relationship between the 4 in coherent form, something that allows them to interact, to combine, to produce the infinite variety of physical reality from just 4 fundamental principles. The 4 elements are the instruments. The 5th element is the musician. Without it, the 4 are raw potential, unorganized, unrelated, incapable of producing the coherent, intelligible, purposive reality that we actually inhabit. With it, the 4 become a language, a means through which a deeper intelligence expresses itself in material form. This is what every tradition that pushed past the 4 eventually recognized, and it is why quintessence, in all its names and forms, is the most significant concept in the entire classical understanding of reality. Now let's trace the history of this concept, because the evolution of this idea across 2.5 millennia tells us something important about the human capacity to recognize a truth that precedes the language available to describe it. Aristotle was the first Western philosopher to formally articulate the 5th element, building on intuitions that predated him in Platonic and pre-Socratic philosophy. For Aristotle, the 4 elements were subject to change, to corruption, to transformation from one state to another. Fire became air, became water, became earth, in an endless cycle of elemental transformation. This changeability was the defining characteristic of the physical world, everything beneath the sphere of the moon. But the celestial realm, the stars, the planets, the heavens themselves, did not change. The stars were the same tonight as they were thousands of years ago. Whatever the heavens were made of, it was not subject to the cycle of generation and corruption that governed the 4 elements. Aristotle called it ether, identifying it as a substance of the stars, the medium of the celestial realm, the element that was by its nature pure, immutable, and divine. Not merely a cosmological speculation. For Aristotle, the ether was a principle of perfection itself. The element that had no opposite, that could not be corrupted, that represented the highest state of being toward which the 4 lower elements were always in their imperfect way. Medieval and Renaissance alchemy is almost universally misunderstood as a primitive attempt to transmute lead into gold. This misunderstanding obscures what alchemy actually was. The alchemical project was not primarily metallurgical. It was cosmological and spiritual. The transmutation of lead into gold was a metaphor, a physical correlate of a deeper transmutation, the refinement of the base human being into the perfected spiritual being. The philosopher's stone was not a literal stone. It was the principle of perfection itself, the quintessence extracted from the raw material of a human existence through the alchemical processes of dissolution, purification, and integration. The alchemists understood quintessence as the soul of a substance, the pure spiritual principle that animated and organized the four elemental components of any physical thing. The alchemical work was the extraction of this quintessence from the practitioner themselves, the dissolution of the ego's base material, the purification of the emotional body, the calcination of fixed beliefs that prevented the soul's light from shining through, the final distillation, the emergence of the quintessential self, the self as pure consciousness rather than as the accumulation of conditioning and wound. Carl Jung, who spent decades studying alchemical texts, identified the alchemical quintessence with what he called the self, the totality of the psyche, the integrated whole that includes both conscious and unconscious, both light and shadow. In Jungian psychology, the process of individuation, the lifelong work of becoming who you actually are, of integrating the fragmented parts of the psyche into a coherent, authentic whole, is a psychological equivalent of the alchemical extraction of quintessence. The quintessence is not something outside of you. It is what you are, when everything that is not essentially you has been refined away. The fifth element is the element of your truest nature, the divine principle that organized the four elements of your physical existence into the specific, unrepeatable configuration that is you. Now let's go into the dimension of this conversation that is most startling, the bridge between ancient esoteric knowledge and modern scientific discovery. Plasma is created when energy is applied to a gas with sufficient force to strip electrons from their atoms, creating a field of a freely moving charged particles, ions and electrons, that no longer behave as individual atoms but as a unified collective system. Plasma is the most abundant state of visible matter in the observable universe. Estimates suggest that 99% of all visible matter in the cosmos is in the plasma state. Stars are plasma. The interstellar medium is largely plasma. The solar wind is plasma. Lightning is plasma. And plasma behaves differently from the other three states in ways that have no parallel in ordinary matter. Plasma is a collective state. Individual particles lose their individual behavior and begin responding as a unified field. It self-organizes. It creates structures, filaments, magnetic fields, vortices from within. The plasma state is where matter begins to behave like something that has a kind of intelligence. The ancient concept of ether described a medium more subtle than the four physical elements, that permeated all of space, that transmitted forces and influences across distances without apparent physical mechanism. In the 20th and 21st centuries, quantum field theory has revealed that the vacuum of space is not actually empty. It is a field of infinite potential energy, the zero-point field, seething with virtual particle pairs that constantly emerge and annihilate. A fullness rather than an emptiness. The quantum vacuum is a modern scientific description of what the ancient world described as ether. Its properties, its fundamental role as the ground of all physical existence, its energetic fullness, are strikingly consistent with what every tradition identified as the fifth element. And plasma, as a state of matter most energetically proximate to this vacuum state, as a state where the boundary between matter and energy becomes more permeable, is the closest physical bridge between the four classical elements and the fifth. The plasma state, in its collective behavior, in its self-organization, in its sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, is a physical state of matter that most closely resembles the properties attributed to the fifth element across traditions. What the ancients called quintessence, what they described as the substance of the divine, the soul of matter, the organizing principle of reality, modern science is circling from the outside. without yet being able to fully name what it is circling. The name does not matter. The recognition does. And the recognition is converging. Now let's go to the layer beneath the layer. Because everything we have discussed about quintessence so far, the Greek ether, the alchemical soul of substance, the plasma analog, has been describing it from the outside as a thing, as a substance, however refined, as something that exists alongside the other four elements, only higher. But the deepest esoteric traditions, the Hermetic schools, the advanced ceremonial magic lineages, take the teaching somewhere far more radical than that. The fifth element is not a substance at all. It is a consciousness itself, not consciousness as a byproduct of the brain, not awareness as something the four elements produce when arranged correctly. No, consciousness as the ground, the thing in which earth, water, air, and fire arise, are experienced and are organized into coherent reality. So earth is your body, your physical experience of density and form. Water is your emotional life, your fluid, feeling, intuitive nature. Air is your mind, your thought, your language, your capacity to perceive pattern and meaning. Fire is your will, your desire, your transformative drive, your capacity to initiate and change. And the fifth is awareness that contains all four. The you that watches the body, feels the emotion, thinks the thoughts, and directs the will. The witness, the observer, the I am, that exists before all of its contents and persists through all of their changes. This is what the Hermetic tradition meant when it said, the universe is mental. Not that it is imaginary, but that consciousness is the medium in which reality occurs. The way water is the medium in which the fish swim. The fish don't notice the water, but remove it, and there is no fish, no swimming, no ocean. You are not a being who has consciousness. You are consciousness that has temporarily organized itself into a being. And this is precisely where the magical tradition takes the teaching to its most operationally significant conclusion. In Western magic, in the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, in the deeper streams of Thelemic and Kabbalistic practice, the magician is not defined by supernatural ability. The magician is defined by their relationship to the fifth element. So the understanding is this. The four elements are the forces of nature and psyche. The fifth element is a consciousness, quintessence, spirit, is a principle capable of harmonizing and directing them. And magic is the intentional direction of those forces through will. Fire is directed will, the force of transformation and initiation. Water is directed imagination and emotion. The fluid creative medium through which intention takes shape. Air is directed thought and symbol, the mental architecture that gives form to what fire initiates and water shapes. Earth is directed action and manifestation, the physical anchoring of what the other three have prepared. And the one who directs all four from the awareness of the fifth, from the quintessential center of their own consciousness, is operating as a conscious co-creator of reality rather than as someone to whom reality simply happens. Aleister Crowley's famous definition that magic is causing change in accordance with will is not about supernatural intervention. It is about alignment, the alignment of intention, the alignment of emotion, thought, and action, all four elements, through the organizing intelligence of the fifth. When all four elements are coherently directed by the fifth, when your body, your emotions, your mind, and your will are all moving in the same direction, organized by the clear awareness of conscious intent, reality responds, because you have become coherent, and coherent fields resonate with the quantum field, the ether, in ways that incoherent fields cannot. This is the most natural thing available. It is the human being operating as they were always designed to operate. as a 5-element system, with the 5th element fully active at the crown. The question is never whether this capacity is available to you. It always has been. The question is whether you have done enough work in the 4 elements, enough grounding in earth, enough emotional fluency in water, enough mental clarity in air, enough directed will in fire to allow the 5th to operate through you with precision rather than with the static of elemental imbalance. That is the work. That is always the work. Now let's decode the first of the 2 symbols and correct a misunderstanding that has obscured its meaning for most people. The pentagram as a 5-element symbol. The symbol that maps the 5 elements, all 5, including spirit as the 5th, is the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, not the 6-pointed star, which we all come to. The pentagram, 5 points, 5 elements, one completed cosmological map. This distinction matters enormously, and confusing the 2 in symbols loses the precision of both. The pentagram appears across virtually every ancient culture that developed geometric sacred symbolism. In ancient Mesopotamia, in Pythagorean sacred mathematics, where the 5-pointed star was a symbol of the brotherhood and of the principle of life itself. In medieval European esotericism, in Renaissance Hermetic philosophy, and in the ceremonial magic traditions of the 19th and 20th centuries, where its elemental mapping was most formally codified. The Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, the most influential esoteric school of the modern era, formalized the assignment of the 5 elements to the 5 points of the pentagram in the system. All the 4 lower points of the upright pentagram sit the 4 physical elements, organized according to a specific hierarchy that encodes a precise cosmological understanding. Earth at the lower left, the most material, the most dense, the most grounded of the elements, the foundation of physical existence. Water as the lower right, the fluid principle, the emotional and intuitive dimension of experience, paired with earth at the base of the star to anchor the physical and emotional foundation of embodied life. Fire at the upper right, the transformative, initiative, will-based element, rising from the base toward the 5th point, carrying the energy of transformation upward. Air at the upper left, the mental, connective, communicative element, the medium through which fire's transformation is understood and through which spirit's intelligence is received. And at the very top, the crown, the singular uppermost point of the pentagram. Spirit, quintessence, the 5th element. Aether, consciousness itself. The geometry is the teaching. The 4 material elements occupy the 4 lower points. They are the foundation, the substance, the content of physical existence. And spirit grounds them all. Not as one element among 5 equal peers, but as the organizing principle that governs, directs, and gives meaning to the 4 below it. Spirit over matter, consciousness over content, the 5th element not alongside the 4, but above them, as their source, their organizer, their ultimate nature revealed. This is the upright pentagram. And this orientation, spirit at the crown, is a symbol of the awakened human being, the person in whom the 5th element is active and dominant, whose consciousness governs their physical body, their emotional life, their mental activity, and their will, rather than being governed by them. When the pentagram is inverted, when earth occupies the top point and spirit is pushed to the bottom, the symbolic meaning reverses. Matter governs consciousness. The physical, the material, the elemental drive run the show, and spirit is suppressed beneath them. Now, this is not evil in the melodramatic sense that popular culture has assigned it. It is the map of an imbalanced state, the state most people actually live in, where the body's cravings, the emotions' reactivity, the mind's compulsive activity, and the ego's drives direct the life. While the fifth element, the true self, the conscious awareness, that is the actual director of the system, is buried beneath the noise of the four. The spiritual path in the Hermetic, the Wiccan, the ceremonial magic, and in every tradition that has used this symbol, is a path of returning the pentagram to its upright orientation, of doing enough elemental work that spirit reclaims the crown, that consciousness becomes once again what it always was designed to be, the organizer of the four, not their prisoner. There is one more dimension of the pentagram that makes its 5-element encoding unmistakable: the human body. A human being standing with arms outstretched and legs apart fits perfectly within a 5-pointed star. The head at the top point, the seat of consciousness, the location of spirit, the 2 hands at the upper side points, fire and air, the active, expressive, reaching element, the 2 feet at the lower points, water and earth, the grounding, receiving, foundational elements. You are a walking pentagram. The 5-element system is not abstract cosmology. It is your anatomy. And the 5th element, spirit, is not separate from your body. It is expressed through it, at the crown, in every moment of genuine awareness. This is what Leonardo da Vinci was encoding in the Vitruvian Man. The human being as a perfect expression of the 5-element system, the living pentagram, the cosmos in miniature. Now let's begin in the second symbol, the one that completes the picture the pentagram begins. The Seal of Solomon, also known as the Star of David, the hexagram, is a 6-pointed star formed by 2 interlocking equilateral triangles. 6 points, not 5. This is a completely different symbol from the pentagram, with a completely different geometry and a completely different teaching. Its origins predate its association with Solomon, appearing in ancient Mesopotamia, in Bronze Age artifacts, in Hindu Yantra tradition, where it is called the Shatkon, and in virtually every culture that developed geometric sacred symbolism. In Kabbalistic tradition, the Jewish mystical system, the 6-pointed star maps onto the structure of the Tree of Life, onto the divine name, onto the architecture of creation itself. It is not primarily an elemental map. It is a map of relationship, specifically the relationship between 2 fundamental principles that the entire universe is structured around. The 2 triangles, the Seal of Solomon, is formed by these 2 equilateral triangles in perfect opposition. One pointed upward, one pointed downward, interlocked, so that each penetrates the center of the other. This geometry encodes the fundamental principle of reality that every esoteric tradition in history has identified as primary: the union of opposites. The upward triangle, pointing toward the sky, toward the transcendent, toward the immaterial, represents the spirit, the masculine principle, fire, ascending consciousness, the force that moves from matter toward the divine, the human soul reaching towards its source. The downward triangle, pointing toward the earth, toward the immanent, towards the material, represents matter, the feminine principle, water, descending manifestation, the force that moves from the divine toward material expression, the divine descending into embodied form. Their interlocking, their mutual penetration without the destruction of either, represents the fundamental cosmological truth that matter and spirit are not opposites in conflict, but complementary principles in eternal relationship. That creation is not a war between the material and the divine, but a dance between them. That the universe is the meeting point, the interlocking center, where spirit descends into matter and matter ascends towards spirit simultaneously. This is the same principle encoded in the Taoist yin-yang, in the Hindu Shiva Shakti, in the Hermetic axiom as above so below. The Seal of Solomon, decoded through the lens of consciousness rather than cosmology alone, becomes the map of the awakened human being. The upward triangle represents awareness reaching toward its own source. The movement of consciousness recognizing itself as more than its contents. The downward triangle represents consciousness descending into full embodied experience, choosing to know itself through the four elements rather than remaining as undifferentiated awareness. Their intersection, the hexagon center of the seal, is the awakened human being, the person who is fully embodied and fully aware simultaneously, who lives in the four elements completely and is identified with the spirit completely, who feels, thinks, wills, and acts, and knows, beneath all of that, the unchanging awareness in which all of it is occurring. Some occult schools treat this center, the I am, consciousness, that balance, or polarities, as a point of quintessence in the seal, as the living presence that emerges when the ascending and descending forces of a human life are brought into genuine balance. Here is the complete picture, and this is where the two symbols become one unified teaching. The pentagram maps the vertical hierarchy of the elements. 5 points, 4 physical elements in their proper relationship, spirit at the crown governing all 4. It answers the question, what are the components of reality and how do they relate to each other in terms of hierarchy and function? The seal of Solomon maps the horizontal relationship of the fundamental polarities, spirit and matter, above and below, masculine and feminine, ascending and descending. It answers the question, how do the two primary forces of creation, consciousness and matter, the divine and the physical, relate to each other? Together they form the complete cosmological picture. The pentagram tells you what you are made of and what governs the system. The seal of Solomon tells you how the governing principle and the governed materials relate, as the eternal creative tension that produces the universe. You are a pentagram in your constitution, 5 elements with spirit at the crown, and you are a seal of Solomon in your experience, the meeting point of the divine and the human, the place where consciousness descends into matter and matter reaches back toward consciousness, and something extraordinary emerges at the intersection. So every person has a characteristic elemental configuration, a tendency to overdevelop certain elements and underdevelop others. And the specific pattern of your elemental imbalance tells you precisely where the work is. Too much earth, not enough fire, means grounded, but unable to transform. Now, too much fire, not enough earth, is visionary, but unable to manifest. Too much water and not enough air feels deeply, but cannot understand what is being felt. And too much air and not enough water understands everything intellectually but cannot feel it in the body. The 5th element becomes accessible when all 4 are in relative balance, not perfect balance. That is an ideal rather than an achievable state. But when no single element dominates to the exclusion of the others, the crown of the pentagram lights up. Spirit becomes not a concept, but a lived reality. The alchemical processes that refine the 4 elements toward the 5th are not medieval rituals. They are descriptions of experiences available in ordinary life. Calcination by fire, which is the burning away of what is false. The solution of water is the emotional opening that follows. Separation by air is a discernment and clarity that emerges when emotion has moved. Conjunction with earth, by earth, is the integration of what the previous stages have refined into lived embodied reality. And then, at the completion of these 4 processes, the experience of quintessence, the direct recognition of the 5th element, not as a concept, as your own awareness, finally visible to itself. This is the alchemical pattern to healing framework in its most literal, most ancient, most precise sense. The 4 elements as the domains of my work, the 5th as a destination that was always the point. The pentagram maps what you are. The seal of Solomon maps the dance you are participating in. And the 5th element, the spirit, consciousness, quintessence, the Aether, that modern physics is still circling from the outside, is not somewhere above you, or beyond you, or waiting to be achieved. It is what you are when the 4 are in balance. It has always been at the crown. If this framework is activating something in you and you're ready to apply the alchemical map to your actual life, the Ethereus Academy and the Alchemical Pattern to Healing Framework are exactly where this work lives. Everything you need is in the show notes below. Until next time.